Okay, in this next presentation, we're going to really focus on memory and some of the techniques that we can use to enhance our memory. And I know a number of people did their brochures on this topic. One of the ways that I'm making up for the fact that we can't be together on Monday is by having you complete a short essay question where I ask you to apply some of these techniques to one of your own classes. And I encourage you to use not just the information that I'm presenting here, but also information in the book and certainly information that you and your classmates created for your brochures. I think there's definitely going to be a lot of great information in those brochures. One of the big things that I really want to emphasize to you is this area right here about rehearsal. So classically, the way that we will study for things, the way we might memorize a phone number or somebody's name or a shopping list, is that we just rehearse that information over and over again. And so rehearsal involves very shallow processing. And it's shallow because you're not going more deeply into thinking about the meaning of what you're looking at. So a lot of times I'll get on the shuttle bus and I will see students who are reading over their PowerPoints, reading the words on the PowerPoint again and again and again, and I just think, wow, that is such a bad way to study. And yet, it is the way that we usually study. It takes a huge amount of time to read over all of those notes and just read them. But it's not very effective. Something else I have up here is that rehearsal typically creates a serial position effect, and the book talks about this. It means that our likelihood of recalling the information depends upon the information's position in the list. So what we know is that people recall the beginning information very well. Usually that's because they have rehearsed it the most. And they tend to recall the end information very well because it's the last thing that's in your mind. Nothing else has interfered with it. But that means all of that middle stuff gets just kind of gunked together, and it's really difficult to remember. If we were in class, I'd talk a little bit about presidents. You think about which presidents do you remember? Everybody remembers George Washington, Thomas Jefferson. Everybody remembers Obama or George W. Bush. So that's showing us the serial position effect. But what about the stuff in the middle? Well, usually we will remember a few names of presidents from the middle of the list. Kennedy, for example, or Lincoln, or Roosevelt. We remember people who did something meaningful or had something meaningful happen to them. And so this gets into this next line about information being encoded best when we process it more deeply, when we elaborate on it, when we really think about the meaning of something. And so I think we can really use this to our advantage when we are studying, or if you're trying to put together a list of things and you want to try and remember it. So I have the suggestions right here. One of the things I really want to emphasize is this issue of connecting information to yourself. If we were in class, I would have done a little demonstration that always works. That when you ask people to connect information to themselves, even if I don't tell them to memorize the information, but I just say, think about how these words relate to you. People who are doing that always outperform folks who are told to memorize the list. Always. And this is an established point in memory research, that when we can connect information to ourselves, we're doing better. And so one of the reasons why the model of accelerated learning, when done correctly, and you don't cancel class all the time, is that we spend a lot of time in class connecting the information to your own experiences. And all of our data indicate that this is one of the best ways to get you to learn and remember the information. Another big thing I'll draw your attention to is chunking information together in a meaningful fashion. So if you're getting a huge array of information, lots and lots of symptoms for a disease, or many different issues to consider when you are having to deal with maybe an administrative problem, rather than just kind of listing all of these points, if you can chunk them together, create some outlines, or create maybe a more visual concept map, create ways to chunk together things that go together by rewriting your notes, you are going to be much better off. Okay, so like I said, brochures that you all made probably have a lot of other study tips. Another study tip I want to bring up, and this may be in some of the brochures as well, you might have been told this by some instructors, but there's a phenomenon in memory called encoding specificity. What that essentially means is that we will do best at retrieving information if the place where we are retrieving it and remembering it is the same place where we studied it or encoded it. The classic example for this is, maybe you have an idea when you're downstairs in your living room, you run upstairs to grab something, and once you get upstairs, you go, oh, why did I run up here? And the only way you can really remember is by running back downstairs and getting into that same context where you were when you first thought of it. So of course you get downstairs, you go, yeah, that's right, that's what I have to do. And hopefully you can remember it the next time you go back upstairs. So how does this relate to studying? Well, as I have on this little set of images here, a lot of times we will study in our rooms, or maybe in a coffee shop, where I've seen definitely some people studying in the gym. But then of course we take our tests here, so that our study context doesn't match our test context at all. And of course we study when we're probably pretty relaxed, and we test when we're feeling stressed. One of the ways that we can certainly enhance our test performance is by trying to match our study and our test conditions. All right, now I want to switch gears and talk a little bit about what is happening in our brain to actually allow us to learn new information. Now, in the book, it talks a little bit about the concept of long-term potentiation. Basically, that is the biological process by which the neurons change their connections. And essentially what's happening is those neural connections are getting stronger and stronger and stronger. And long-term potentiation was discovered fairly recently, and it proves a principle known as Hebbian learning that's been around probably since around the 1950s. So Donald Hebb had theorized that the way that we learn is by neurons wiring together. Essentially, when he says wire together, what he means is that their connections get stronger and stronger. So if we look over here at this neural network right here, so each one of these circles represents a neuron's cell body. This is what's known as its axon. This is the process that allows it to send information to this next axon. And what's not being shown technically is structures known as dendrites, which allow a neuron to receive information. Anyway, this is a simplified drawing of a neural network. You can see there's a whole collection of neurons right here. Now, whenever we encounter something new, you look at a nice flower or you see somebody's face, you're going to activate a collection of neurons. So you can see these guys in red have been activated. Now, every time you think about that flower again, you're going to activate that same subset of neurons. Every time you maybe have a dream about that flower, those same collection of neurons get activated. And what Hebb argued is that each time these neurons are active together, what he called firing together, they are going to get stronger and stronger. And basically it's that there's a little there's a change that occurs right here at what's known as the synapse. That's how the two neurons are connected. And as that change occurs, if you have activity, I cannot find my cursor, if you have activity in this neuron, it is going to automatically cause a change in activity in this neuron because they have fired together nicely. It won't necessarily cause a change in this guy because it hasn't really fired, it hasn't wired together, but these two have. And so that is essentially what a memory is, where neurons that are active at the same time start to wire together. And my analogy for that is probably as you take classes with the same people. You're taking classes again and again and again, and at first you may not know that person that's in your AP lab group. You might not know that person who's in in your cohort for your bachelor's program. But after the end of the semester, because you guys have been firing together, you've been going to the same classes together for so much, you begin to wire together, you become friends. So that eventually, it could happen that as soon as a person thinks of you, they automatically think of this other person because you guys have gotten to be such good friends. So now you have wired together. So essentially that's what a memory is. Now this process occurs very readily in the hippocampus region. So if you recall, hippocampus is our main structure for forming memories. All right, so the hippocampus has something kind of special to it that allows it to be really importantly involved in forming new memories. So if we take a look at this brain structure right here, the hippocampus is essentially being represented here in green. And it is essentially the trigger. It activates a whole bunch of other areas of cortex. So if you encounter a new memory, that's going to activate neurons in your occipital lobe. It's going to activate neurons in your temporal lobe, in your parietal lobe, in your frontal lobe, all over the place. And what the hippocampus basically does is it activates all those neurons again and again and again and again and again and again until eventually that whole neural network has become wired together. So the hippocampus is kind of the taskmaster that ensures that that wiring together happens in the brain. So this process actually takes the hippocampus about a year of repeatedly co-activating all of those different brain structures. And then eventually the hippocampus isn't needed anymore. These brain structures are those neural networks there are so interconnected with one another that the hippocampus isn't necessary anymore. And so at that point we would say that the memory is consolidated. And this is why in the video, the patient EP could remember information from the past, even though his hippocampus wasn't intact anymore. Those memories from the past, the 6-foot rack, or memories for the town where he grew up, the hippocampus wasn't necessary for those memories anymore because they had been consolidated or solidified in the rest of the cortex. However, new stuff, he can't encode or he can't store new memories because the hippocampus is no longer there to be the taskmaster and get the rest of the brain to become interconnected. So once the hippocampus is gone, we can no longer learn new things, but we can still recall old memories because actually our frontal lobe is what triggers recall, and those memories are actually stored all throughout our brains. The hippocampus is just basically what kickstarts the process. All right, so I've moved on to a new slide here, and this brings me to the fact that memory is actually comprised of several different systems, and the book gets into this as well. Commonly, what we think of as memory is actually what scientists call declarative memory. It's memories that we can declare, that we can talk about. And so if we go back to patient EP in the video, if you recall, he had no conscious memory of Jen, the research assistant. So that was not a memory that he could declare. However, when Alan Alda went and interviewed Jen and Larry Squire, they said that he seems to have some kind of recollection, some level of familiarity with them. I think Larry Squire said he lets us in the door faster than he used to. So even though he's not conscious of any memory of Jen, there seems to be some non-conscious, or what we would call non-declarative memory of them. And so when Alan Alda was talking to the researcher Larry Squire, he said, one of the things that has helped EP to let them in the door faster is that his experiences with the researchers have been positive and not negative. And so that reflects the fact that one form of non-declarative memory is conditioning, which we'll talk about it in another segment. So classical conditioning, like taste aversions right here, but also operant conditioning, which is where we learn from reinforcement and punishment. So EP can still learn through classical and operant conditioning. But if you think about it, your dog probably doesn't have conscious memories of its life, but it does a very good job of learning by conditioning. So a dog probably has perfectly fine non-declarative memory, not too much in the way of declarative memory. We also see that another form of non-declarative memory is habit learning. And I think this is a really good example. I would hope many of you or all of you can ride a bike. But if you tried to tell a 5-year-old how to ride a bike, you wouldn't be able to do that. That's not a memory that you can declare. But by golly, you get on that bike and you zoom away. Same thing with text messaging. That's something that you can probably do really, really quickly and really easily. I can't because I don't text and I haven't really had any practice with it. But one of the ways that we gain non-declarative memories or habit learning is through practice. And so essentially what we're doing is we're strengthening those neural connections, even though we aren't aware of it. A final category of non-declarative memory is implicit memory. And this is where we learn information in a very passive manner. So you can see I have political signs right here. One of the reasons why politicians will just saturate a place with their name, either through TV advertisements or through signs like this, is because they don't necessarily care that you know that much about them. It's just that when you go into the voting booth, they want you to have some familiarity. You know, we go into the voting booth, this is from Virginia, and we say, oh yes, George Allen, I recognize that name. I don't know anything about him, but I recognize its name. And we know that when we are familiar with things, we like them better. That's also why advertisers will saturate us with information about their products. They just want you to know the name Kleenex so that when you go down the aisle, you feel better when you see Kleenex than you do when you see maybe just the generic. And so that's actually implicit memory at work. Okay, that does it for the memory section. As I said before at the beginning, there is an essay question that I would just like for you to complete and submit to me related to how this information about memory, particularly information from the book, the brochures, and the talk about how to improve your study techniques. That's really what the question focuses on. So when you have a chance, please submit that to me. And the final video is dedicated to conditioning.